my name's Anjali Deshmukh, and between being an artist and having a career in the social sector, I have thought a lot about what it means to make a difference in the community. We all want that in this room, right? To actually believe that the work that we're doing is actually effective in solving the problems we've set out to solve. Now, in the social sector, organizations often measure impact by having a theory of change, such as wanting to solve climate change or end the traumas of racism. And then they work backwards from that goal to actually measure impact. And they do that by essentially having an evidence-based intervention that essentially works to solve that problem and monitoring the effects of that intervention. But as an artist, I wondered if it was possible to have a measurable impact without having a specific impact goal. I wanted to create something visually moving and allow participants to choose their own path. And I didn't want age or necessarily language or to be a barrier to participation. So that's where the random generator started. Imagine that an artwork could read your mind. Somehow it was able to predict how you were feeling about an event in your life. So maybe it was the loss of a loved one or the birth of a child. Maybe it was a crime you committed. It was a 1 in 1,000 chance, but somehow an artwork told you exactly how you were feeling about it. How would you react? Would you dismiss it as chance, or would you believe it was fate? And what if the emotion it predicted was the opposite of how you felt? Would you dig deeper into the roots of your own feelings? So this is the kind of existential experience that the random generator sparks in people. While every game is different, here's how one of them works. You pick a game piece that has a unique meaning, but you don't yet know what it means. You put it down on a game board, carefully selecting from thousands of events laid out in front of you like a whirlwind of human experience. You're surrounded by people, collectively making choices together. It's pretty simple, right? But here's what happened the first time I played this game. I was told that about 300 people would participate, and it turned out that 800 people showed up. People in the local businesses were telling their customers to come play. One participant told me that the game changed her life. Another person shared with me, a complete stranger, an experience that was causing her intense guilt. And others have asked me to use this game in their psychology practices, in their fiction writing classes, or to actually prevent writer's block. What I realized was that meaningful and sometimes uncomfortable roles can actually unlock creativity in people that they themselves didn't realize was possible, and that the process of making can actually matter more than the outcome. So what does this all have to do with measuring impact? First, by developing longer connections with participants, I think their creativity can turn into life change. So to test this, I designed my own horoscope system around the installation that you see here, which was on a rooftop farm, and it walked through essentially a timeline of the universe from past to future. Participants essentially received a fortune based on how they interacted with the installation. Sometimes their fortunes were eerily accurate. And based on this fortune, they made a decision about a life change they wanted to make, and I offered to contact them exactly 1 year later to find out if they actually followed through. And on August 29th, 2016, I did just that. So far, what I've learned from the people that actually responded to me was that an artwork can actually help people turn their lives into a work of art, and that is actually a route to behavior change. Second, I think that we can learn about the collective experience of a community if the installation is permanent. As a first test, I'm collaborating with an amazing engineer and friend of mine, Dave Sklar, to build an online prototype of my Universe game, which you can see an early version of if you go to my South by Southwest profile and my LinkedIn profile. But imagine if there was a real place where hundreds of thousands of stories could build up over time. What would we learn about our communities? I hope to find out one day. Thank you. Thank you.
I really love how in the early iterations of it, it doesn't rely on any kind of digital or electronic component. It's completely based on ideas and simple materials. Do you think that moving it to a web-based platform will transform that spirit?
Moving it to a what? I'm sorry.
A web-based platform?
Yes. Actually, Dave and I were just talking about that this morning because the prototype that you're seeing, we're still working on it right now. We are right now thinking that it's never going to be entirely an online platform because the place does matter and the personal, physical experience of walking through the environment and being with people does matter. But I, typically put these installations together in less than 3.5, 4 hours of installation time. very quickly up and down, and this will hopefully allow for some space to actually think through the design with a greater sensitivity to detail, and hopefully allow for a place for these stories to live long term.
In going from, because one thing that was really striking is just the different textures and the very kind of handmade quality. And in some ways, it's arguably it could be more of an invitation to interaction because there's not that technology threshold. Mm-hmm. And so how are you going to design it so when the technology is there that it kind of still has that handmade and invitational quality to it for
mm-hmm. So imagine if this entire wall was the installation projected. What if instead of the choices that people were making, instead of being on the floor, on a road, it was actually on a wall, and you could actually interact physically by putting something on the wall against a sort of projected screen. So that's one way. If they could actually go up on the wall and touch something and be a part of it, but it was still sort of partly a projected screen, that's one way. Another way is, I touched on a little bit in the presentation, I've been asked actually to create games for psychologists as well as for fiction writers, for people who are early in their fiction writing careers. Because there are ways to use this process to create collaborative fiction together. And in some of the games that I created, actually you can start seeing that in the board, on the board game on the streets, as people kind of start to level up essentially in the games. They start to move from creating these short microfiction pieces to suddenly starting to write short stories, and actually writing short stories with other people in their community. And so if I can take this online, hopefully that interaction can create a sort of more longitudinal relationship between participants, and hopefully people can actually start writing long fiction together. As well, on the psychology side, the folks that have asked me to actually produce games in sort of a small board game fashion have actually suggested to me that they can use it with children in their psychology practice to actually help them deal with their emotions, particularly when it comes to trauma.
Okay, maybe missed it, but in the next 40 seconds, could you just run me through a scenario of what it looks like to actually play the game?
Yes, so essentially, there's a giant board game on the street. This is, I'm just going to give you sort of the example of one of the games I walked through here. Everyone is a little bit different. People walk up to the game, and at the front of the game are game pieces. They stand for something, they have numbers on them. In this game that you saw, they were pennies, colored black or clear, depending on the sort of nature of the participation. And they pick up their penny, and they walk through the game board. And there are thousands of events on the street, from social to dealing with issues of race, to psychological, to physiological, to personal, to dealing with nature, to dealing with sensory experiences. They choose whichever one that they want to pick. And then at the end of the game, they find out that their game piece stood for an emotion.
And that would have to just finish that
I'll
thought.
tell you later, the rest of it.
So for those of you that want to hear more about how to play the game,